John Mark McCafferty is with me, the CEO of Threshold. John Mark, the government themselves accept the reality that there's going to be pressure on homeless services when the ban is lifted. So what preparations are you and others putting in place?
It's a good question, Kieran. I guess we're looking at the figures from the last number of months, and for example, we had 700 web chats in November when the eviction ban took hold, and then we're looking at a similar figure for this month as people are worried about losing their home, and whichever way you look at it in terms of the calls to us or indeed emails or other correspondence. Either we're opening cases where people have been told that they're going to have a tenancy termination, or we're working with historic cases from, say, the autumn when people were faced with a notice of termination and then it's been paused because of the ban, or indeed right now there's a lot of people who think they may be liable to a tenancy termination by their landlord, and so what we need to do, and we have limited resources, is to advise people as best we can about their notice periods, contest the notices of termination if they're technically invalid, or if they don't meet the legal criteria of a legitimate tenancy termination, because what we're about is about advising people about their rights in the private rented sector. We're about preventing homelessness from happening in the first place. So a big part of what we do is tenancy protection, and a big part of that is about representing tenants, mediating with landlords, and trying to ensure that families can hold on to their rented homes. And right now that is a big challenge as we move towards the end of the eviction ban.
What options are available for people who come to the end of that tenancy agreement? I mean, if they can't find somewhere to live, is there a guarantee that some roof will be found over their head?
Well, we believe there should be a guarantee that some kind of roof should be found, emergency or otherwise, and local authorities do have an obligation to accommodate families and individuals who find themselves in that situation. What we try and do is obviously contest any kind of problems with a notice of termination, but we also then try and say, okay, you have been in your tenancy for so many years, therefore your notice period should be so many months, and that might give you some time to source accommodation. As you've alluded to, there's very, very little housing available in the rented sector, and also there is a worry. We have a concern of the capacity of local authorities right now to provide that emergency accommodation. Add to that, we're at the beginning of the tourist season, as we well know, so hotels that might have been able to house people over the winter months may not be able to do so. Okay. And we have less availability because of the rise in short lets, short let platforms, and a reduction in overall supply. So we have a real challenge in our hands. Local authorities have a real challenge on their hands, and we're trying to reassure and provide whatever advice we can.
I mean, is it a very real possibility that we're going to have families turning up again at Garda stations and the like?
Well, there's a real possibility that there will be an increase in families and individuals who are presenting as homeless and seeking the assistance and the emergency accommodation provided by or supported or funded by local authorities. The question there is, do all local authorities have the capacity to be able to meet that demand from the 1st of April onwards? And I guess the longer term question is about supply, and I suppose that's partly why we're in this whole kind of debacle about the end of the eviction ban. Supply in the short term, medium term, long term, with regard to the private rented sector, and this eviction ban was about creating a breathing space for government and for local government to come up with solutions. Some supply came on stream in terms of social housing and cost rental housing, but clearly a lot more supply needs to come on stream in terms of social housing, cost rental housing, and wider home ownership.
Did you suspect more would be done in the 6 months? That's been the criticism of some, from some of government, is that there's a sense that they didn't do an awful lot in the 6 months.
Well, I suppose it's a limited period, so there is only so much you can do for something which is kind of generational in the nature and scale of the problem. And the delivery of housing supply doesn't happen overnight. could more have been done in relation to protecting tenants who are in situ while a house is sold? Because at the core of this, these evictions is the sale of private rented housing by landlords. So probably more could have been done at local level around supporting purchases with tenants in situ to local authorities or approved housing bodies.
Now, what's your assessment then of the government's safety net that they announced yesterday? And a big part of it is kind of re-emphasising this tenants in situ scheme, because there's a school of thought that says, you know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result. You know, some local authorities, plenty of them, have been very reluctant, for whatever reason, to engage with the tenant in situ scheme. Did yesterday's announcement fill you with hope that that's suddenly going to change?
I think if it puts greater momentum on local authorities to really deliver on that, then that's a positive thing. I think it does question, you know, can all local authorities, do all local authorities have the capacity to really deliver with regard to housing policy? Because it's such a vital piece of national infrastructure. And a lot of our local authorities are very small. And the scale of the challenges across private rented, social housing, owner occupation, they really are of a massive scale that perhaps we need a lot more done, maybe at national or regional level, to make these things happen. Because there appears to me to be blockages in the system. I mean, there are regions that haven't convened things like meetings to do with homeless services for years at a time of an alleged homeless crisis. So, I mean, yeah, I'd have questions around.
Is that staff shortages in local authorities, or what do you suspect it is?
I think it's a number of things. I do think there were big changes around the time of the global financial crisis, when budgets were cut, and I question, is housing seen as that kind of vital infrastructure that maybe other areas are, and is it seen with the kind of kudos that it really should have, both at local government level and centrally? Because really we need really good people implementing programs and projects across the tenures in order to try and solve or at least tackle some of these intractable issues.
So some people, who are very active in this space have suggested that after the 1st of April, tenants shouldn't leave their home. Overholding, they talk about that they should simply resist given the scale of the emergency. I mean, what's your official advice in that regard?
Well, it's a very, very challenging situation for families right now. We advise within the bounds of the law. We are tasked to advise within the bounds of the law, and we advise according to the Residential Tenancies Acts. That said, we're really mindful of the very, very challenging situations facing individuals and families who are in the private rented sector, who are faced with a notice of termination now, or are worried that they will be faced with one in the future. And the spectre is very little, alternative accommodation, and that is a real issue. We are there, and I think it's really important to say this, Kieran. Threshold is there to advise people, to assist people, to provide them with the advice and tailored advice on their circumstances regarding the Residential Tenancies Act, and we will try and save tenancies to the best of our ability.
John Mark McCafferty, CEO of Threshold. John Mark, as always, thanks a million for joining us.